The brake pedal hit the floor. Not gradually, not with warning. 1 second, Jiho's foot had resistance, and the next it had nothing. Just dead travel all the way to the mat, and the mountain curve was coming, and the car was not slowing down. Janet. One word. The way you say someone's name when you have already done the math and the math is bad. She felt it in his voice before she felt it in the car. She looked at his face and she saw it. She stopped breathing. The guardrail came up fast. She threw herself across him. No thought, no decision, pure muscle, pure reflex, pure love doing what love does when the brain is still catching up, covering him with her body the way you cover something you cannot replace. The guardrail did not hold. The car left the road. For 1 terrible second, there was nothing under them. Just air and rain, and the sound of the engine screaming at a gradient it was never designed for. Then the drop ended, and the world arrived all at once. Metal compressing, glass becoming something that was no longer glass, the passenger side folding inward like a mouth closing, and Janet's body absorbing the collision that would have taken his door and his skull and his life in the same instant. Then silence. The rain kept falling. It did not care. Janet opened her eyes into darkness and broken glass and the smell of something chemical and something earthy and something she would later understand was her own blood. The car was on its side, 18 feet below the road, wedged against the embankment at an angle that meant the roof was the closest thing to a wall. She found his pulse with 2 fingers at his throat. There, shallow, uneven, terrifyingly slow. Jiho? She pressed her palm to his face. Cold. Too cold already. Jiho, open your eyes. Open your eyes right now. Nothing. The cut above his left eyebrow was bleeding in a way that did not stop when she pressed against it. His breathing came in intervals with gaps between them that she counted and hated counting. 3 seconds. 4. 3 again. Don't you dare, she said. Her voice broke on the last word, and she let it break. Don't you dare leave me here. Not like this. Not tonight of all nights. She found her phone in the footwell. Screen destroyed, still making the call. Across the city, in a high-rise apartment with the lights already off, a phone lit up on a nightstand. The person in that bed did not sit up, read the notification, placed the phone face down, went back to sleep. In a different building, older, 3 districts east, a man sat up when his phone buzzed. He read the same notification. His expression was not shock. It was not grief. It was the focused, measuring look of a man checking whether something he ordered arrived correctly. 2 phones receiving the same news. 2 entirely different reasons for waiting on it. If you're watching this right now and you think you already know who ordered this crash, drop your answer in the comments immediately because I promise you, you do not have the full picture yet. Subscribe before you go any further, because when the truth comes out in this story, it is going to detonate everything you think you understand. Like this video right now, let's go. 8 weeks before that mountain road, Seoul in January was the kind of cold that gets inside your thinking. The city stripped down to gray concrete and frozen wind and the particular brutality of a place that has decided winter is not a season, but a personality. Janet Thompson stood outside in it on purpose. She always stood at edges. Her colleagues thought it was eccentric. Jiho had understood it from the first week without her explaining it. She designed spaces for people to breathe inside, green corridors and community parks, and small recoveries of nature pressed into concrete cities, and she needed the raw world against her face to remember what she was solving for. You cannot design warmth from inside a warm room. You have to know the cold first. Jiho arrived behind her the way he always arrived. No announcement. No performance. 2 careful hands brushing snow from her coat shoulders. Slow and deliberate. And she did not flinch because she always knew when it was him. 14 months had built a language between them that lived entirely below words. You're going to freeze, he said. I'm from Chicago, she said. This is nothing. He stood next to her in it anyway. Neither of them went inside. Their beginning was 14 months before that January, a development summit in Busan. Janet presenting her thesis on emotional green infrastructure, the argument that greenery in cities is not decoration, but psychological language, that the presence or absence of nature in an urban environment determines whether residents feel they belong there or are simply surviving it, that you could measure a neighborhood's mental health by what grew inside it. Ji-ho had found her in the corridor afterward and said without preamble, "I've been trying to find that language for 4 years. I keep looking in the wrong place." "Where are you looking?" "The buildings." "That's why you can't find it," she said. "It was never in the buildings." He hired her 3 weeks later. She redesigned 2 public parks in her first 6 months, solved a drainage problem in Mapo that 3 previous firms had abandoned, and was now 18 months in and building a green corridor through Seoul's most aggressive financial district. Her most ambitious project, the one she woke up at 5 a.m. thinking about, the one she dreamed about in the rare moments she allowed herself to dream, the one that she had quietly decided was going to be the best thing she ever built if it did not destroy her first. Ji-ho had kept 51 of her sketches, filed chronologically in a drawer in his office. He had never mentioned this to anyone. Lee Soo-yeon had noticed. She had noticed everything from the very beginning. She noticed the way Ji-ho's posture changed when Janet walked into a room. She noticed the way he tracked Janet's voice in group conversations without appearing to. She noticed the drawer. She noticed what went into it. She noticed what never came out, and what she did with that noticing was something Janet would spend a long time trying to understand and never fully forgiving. Soo-yeon had been Ji-ho's executive secretary for 6 years. She ran his professional world with a precision that looked effortless, because she had made it effortless through years of invisible work. Schedules running without friction. Communications managed without error. The entire machinery of a conglomerate director's daily life, moving on rails that Soo-yeon had laid and maintained and never once asked to be credited for. She had built her entire professional identity on being indispensable, on being the person who knew everything, managed everything, anticipated everything, on being the one constant in Ji-ho's world. And then Janet Thompson arrived from Chicago with her thesis and her site visits and her imperfect Korean and her morning habit of standing in the cold, and Ji-ho looked at her the way he had never once looked at Soo-yeon in 6 years of standing 3 feet away from him. Not with desire, though that came later. With recognition. The specific look of a person finding something they did not know they had been missing. Soo-yeon saw it happen in real time and smiled her professional smile and filed it away. Toward Janet, she operated in the register of nunchi, the Korean social art of reading and redirecting unspoken currents, and she used it with the precision of someone who had been studying people for long enough to know exactly where the pressure was. A meeting time mistranslated by 7 minutes, so Janet walked into a room already in motion and had to find her seat while everyone was watching. A client dinner where Janet's dietary preferences were quietly overlooked. Not egregiously, just enough to make her feel like a guest who had not quite been expected. A conference room moment where Soo-yeon spoke Korean at a pace Janet could not yet follow, rapid and fluid and perfectly calibrated, and then turned to Janet with a composed and inclusive smile that performed warmth while delivering exclusion. Janet felt it constantly. A low-grade pressure she could not locate or name. The persistent sense of standing slightly outside every room she walked into. She mentioned it once to a colleague who looked at her with genuine confusion and said, "Soo-yeon was wonderful, incredibly professional, one of the best people in the company." And Janet sat with the specific loneliness of a person being gaslit by someone who never raises their voice. That was precisely the design. What Janet did not know, what she had no reason to know, was that Soo-yeon's behavior was not rooted in jealousy. Not really. It was rooted in fear that had been wearing jealousy as a costume for 8 months. And the Aryoru source of that fear had a name and a face, and a 5-year history that had recently crawled back into Soo-yeon's life without warning, without mercy, holding everything she had spent years burying and smiling about it. That source, was Shin Dae-won. He had been in Seoul for 8 months. He had not come for Janet. He had been sent for Jiho. Janet was the entry point, the existing vulnerability, the history that created access and proximity, and the kind of emotional leverage that money alone could not buy. Shin Group Holdings, Han Capital's primary acquisition rival, had found him in Houston through a research operation that took 3 months and identified him as a lever. They studied him. They understood what he wanted. They funded his relocation, his cover, his operations. They gave him a target and a timeline and the specific kind of institutional backing that makes a dangerous man feel invincible. He had agreed without much deliberation. He had unresolved feelings about Janet that had curdled over 3 years into something that no longer resembled love, but still wanted to leave marks in love's name. He told himself he was doing this for reasons that were principled or strategic or at least defensible. He was doing it because she had left and he had never processed that correctly, and this was what unprocessed things do when they are given funding and a mission. Now you know the weapon, now you know who built it and who aimed it. But the person who opened the door and let it inside is the one nobody saw coming, and the one that is going to make you question every person in your life who has ever smiled at you while wishing you would disappear. Keep watching. 3 weeks before the crash, 11:18 p.m., a man walked into the Han Capital Tower parking structure using a keycard that had been deactivated 16 months prior. The security system logged the entry and flagged nothing because a firmware threshold had been quietly adjusted 4 months earlier during a routine update that nobody had reviewed or signed off on. He was inside 11 minutes. No camera captured his face at a usable angle. Nothing was physically disturbed when the morning security team completed their sweep. He was not there to steal anything. He was there to compromise a specific brake line on a specific vehicle in a way that would perform normally under city driving conditions and fail catastrophically under sustained pressure on a wet mountain road. It was precise work, patient work, the kind of work that requires someone to tell you which car, which parking space, which nights the vehicle would be unattended, and which specific driver would be replaced so that the person behind the wheel on the night it mattered would have no loyalty and no reason to ask questions, and would disappear afterward without needing to be asked. Someone had provided all of that information. Someone who had access to all of it. Someone who sat 3 feet from Jiho every single day and knew his schedule before he did. The morning of the crash, Janet woke at 6:15 a.m. She lay in the dark for a moment before she moved. She had been doing that for 4 days, lying in the first moments of consciousness, holding on to the silence before the day required her to be someone with decisions and unresolved things. Then she got up, went to the bathroom, and looked at the pregnancy test sitting on the edge of the sink that she had been avoiding looking at directly for 4 days. 2 lines, clear, unambiguous. She sat on the edge of the tub and held the test in both hands and breathed, and did not perform any of the emotions she had been rehearsing for this moment. She just sat with it. 6 weeks. She had done the math 3 times since Tuesday, and the math kept arriving at the same answer. 6 weeks meant October. The project deadline that ran past midnight. The delivery order. The conversation about what cities owed their residents that went until 3 a.m., and then became something else entirely. Warm and unplanned and entirely theirs. In his office with the city spread out below the windows, like it had been waiting for them to stop pretending they were just colleagues. She pressed her hand flat against her own stomach. Nothing to feel yet. Nothing visible. Just knowledge. She picked up her phone, typed a message to Jiho, 3 sentences, read them back, deleted them, typed it differently, read it back again, deleted it again. Not like this, she decided. Not in a text. Not. In the morning before coffee when he was already in his first meeting and she was standing in a bathroom with her hair undone. This deserved a real moment, a real conversation. Eye contact and enough quiet around it to hold the weight properly. Tonight, she decided. She would tell him tonight. On the drive home after dinner, when it was just the two of them and Seoul moving past the windows and nowhere to be and no performance required. She was always better at difficult truths in motion, when there was somewhere to look, besides directly at the thing and the person hearing it. She covered the test at the bottom of the bathroom trash, straightened up, looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment, and went to work. She did not find the words before the brakes failed. Pause and think about that for 1 second. She spent that entire day knowing. She sat across from him at dinner, knowing. She listened to him ask her to promise him she would stay, and she was sitting on the most important thing she had ever needed to tell him, and she did not say it. Some of you watching this are furious at her right now. Some of you are saying you would have done the exact same thing and you know it. Drop that argument in the comments right now because I need to see both sides and I need to see it get loud. Jiho's regular driver called in sick at 7:30 a.m. the morning of the crash. It was the first time in 2 years the man had called in sick. He had received 800,000 won deposited to his personal account 4 days prior from a shell company that dissolved the following morning, and could not be traced back through any conventional financial channel without the kind of forensic patience that only gets applied after something terrible has already happened. Soo-yeon arranged the replacement driver at 8:04 a.m. with the efficiency that characterized everything she did professionally. The replacement had a prepaid phone number registered to a name that matched no national identity record, no social media presence across any platform, a registered residential address that resolved to an empty commercial lot in Incheon when anyone bothered to check, which nobody did until it was already too late to matter. She made the call, she completed the scheduling function. She told herself the things people tell themselves when they have chosen to perform a small, contained action and refused to look at what it was a piece of. She told herself she did not know exactly what the replacement driver was for. She told herself she was managing a calendar conflict. She told herself Daewon had promised no one would be physically harmed, and she had believed him, because she needed to believe him. And believing something hard enough is not the same as it being true. But it is sometimes the only available option, when the alternative is admitting what you have already become. At dinner that evening, Jiho was carrying something. Janet could feel the weight of it across the table from the first moment they sat down. It was not the productive quiet where he was working through a logistical problem. It was a different quality entirely. The quiet of someone who had arrived at a conclusion they had not yet decided what to do with. The quiet of someone standing at a door they were not sure they wanted to open. She watched him throughout the meal. She did not push. She had learned that about him over 14 months of working alongside him, of watching him navigate things, of understanding the specific architecture of his silence. He would arrive at whatever he needed to say in his own time, and pressing him only drove it deeper underground, where it became harder for either of them to reach. Some people need space to come toward you. Jiho was that kind of person. You had to leave the door open and wait, and eventually he would walk through it. What she did not know was that what he was carrying that evening was a fear he could not name and could not source. A cold, formless dread that had been sitting on him for 3 days. Not about the merger, not about work, something personal and intimate and close, like the feeling of standing at the edge of something you cannot see the bottom of. He had been trying to locate it and failing, and it had made him quiet in the particular way of a man who is frightened and does not have language for it yet. Near the end of the meal, he reached across the table and took her hand. It was unexpected enough that she looked up from her glass immediately. His expression was composed in the way he always kept it composed in public, but his eyes were doing something she could not entirely name, something open and exposed in a way that was not typical for him. "If anything ever happens to me," he said, "promise you'll stay." "Nothing is going to happen to you," she said. "I know. Promise me anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. She felt the words right there. 6 weeks. 2 lines. "I found out this morning. I was going to tell you tonight. I have been carrying this all day and I need you to know." Right there. Right on the edge. Almost. "I promise," she said. He held her hand for another moment, and then let it go, And she almost said, "Wait, there is something I need to tell you," but the waiter came and the moment passed, and she told herself there was still the drive home, and the drive home would be better anyway, and she would say it then. 2 hours later, the brake pedal hit the floor. Jiho woke in a VIP hospital room to the sound of machines, and the smell of antiseptic, and the particular silence of a space where money insulates grief from its own echo. The sutures above his left eyebrow pulled when he turned his head. 2 ribs on his left side had decided to make their existence loudly known. His hands moved before the rest of him was fully conscious, reaching, searching the immediate space with a blind urgency that preceded memory. "She's down the hall," a nurse said from the doorway. Her voice was careful and calibrated. "She's stable. She's being monitored." Stable. Monitored. Words that told him she was alive and told him nothing else useful, and left the rest of the space filled with everything they were not saying. He lay in the bed for approximately 4 minutes. Then he sat up. "Sir, you need to—" "I know what I need," he said, not unkindly, with the specific certainty of a man who has already made every decision available to him in the next 24 hours, and is simply waiting for his body to cooperate with the execution. 2 detectives arrived within 3 hours of his being awake. They came with the particular energy of men who had decided before they left the precinct what they were going to find and had simply driven to the hospital to announce it. Road conditions, driver fatigue, mechanical wear consistent with vehicle age and maintenance history. They were sorry for what he had experienced. Mountain roads in winter rain were genuinely dangerous. The case file would remain technically open, but their recommendation was to categorize it as an unfortunate accident and allow the family to grieve and move forward. They said all of this with straight faces. Jiho let them finish every single word. He gave them the full courtesy of his attention and the full silence that followed their conclusion. "Get out," he said, not loud, not sharp, not theatrical in any way, just 2 words with the absolute bedrock certainty of a man who had spent his entire adult life in rooms where real power was exercised quietly and knew exactly what quiet authority sounded like. They got out. He made 3 phone calls from his hospital bed before the painkillers the nursing staff had been trying to persuade him to take finally made the room tilt slightly. The people he called did not hold official titles or work in official capacities. They worked in the architecture that actually underpins Korean corporate life, the parallel system of private investigators and surveillance operatives and information brokers and legal tacticians who live in the productive shadow between public channels and real power. In Chaebol culture, this is not a euphemism for corruption. It is infrastructure. It is the actual mechanism by which a man like Jiho survives in the environment he was born into. Police reports are public record. Real answers are not. He gave them what he needed. He gave them his timeline. Then he sat in his hospital chair beside Janet's bed and folded a visitor's pamphlet into smaller and smaller triangles and watched the monitors track her pulse and her brain activity and all the invisible interior work her body was doing to come back from wherever it had gone. And he waited. He was very good at waiting. He had learned it from watching his father, which was one of very few things Chairman Park Sung-il had ever given him that he was grateful for. The ability to sit inside uncertainty without letting it show. The ability to hold a long game without flinching at the short-term noise. He folded the pamphlet and watched her breathe and waited. 36 hours after the crash, his investigator sat across from him in the hospital room and walked him through the first layer with a tablet and a voice that had learned over years how to deliver bad information without editorializing. The ghost key card traced to a former Han Capital contractor terminated under a confidentiality agreement 2 years prior. Last documented employment was with a logistics firm that was a subsidiary of a shell company that had dissolved 8 months ago. The kind of corporate nesting doll that requires patience and specific expertise to open properly. At the center of it, when you finally got there, was Shin Group Holdings, Han Capital's primary acquisition rival. The company that had been trying to dismantle Jiho's boardroom position for 18 months through a series of increasingly aggressive maneuvers that had all been contained until now. Soo-yeon's encrypted communication logs showed 4 months of regular data transfers to a Shin Group internal extension. Not bulk data, surgical data, Jiho's private schedule down to the 15-minute block, vehicle assignments including which specific car on which specific day, the precise negotiating positions Han Capital had taken in the merger discussions, the internal numbers, the real floor, the actual walkaway point that Jiho's legal team had spent months constructing. All of it. Moving quietly through an encrypted channel for 4 months while Soo-yeon sat 3 feet away from Jiho and managed his calendar with impeccable precision. The replacement driver had vanished. No trace recoverable through conventional means. He was simply gone, in the way that people disappear when the infrastructure supporting their existence dissolves overnight. Jiho sat with all of this for a long moment. He was very still in the way that he was still when something required total clarity of thought, and any emotion that interfered with that clarity needed to be set aside temporarily and held somewhere else. Then, his investigator added the final piece. A name. The operative who had interfaced directly with Soo-yeon. The man who had served as the human link between Soo-yeon's data and Shin Group's strategy team. The man who had arranged the replacement driver and coordinated the garage access and been the moving, breathing center of the entire operation. Shin Dae-won. Originally from Houston, Texas. Currently in Seoul for 8 months under a cover that had been maintained with Shin Group's financial backing. Janet's former boyfriend. Jiho set the tablet down on the bedside table. Carefully, deliberately. The way you set something down when your hands need to be doing something controlled, because everything else in your body is not currently interested in being controlled. He looked at Janet lying in the hospital bed. The monitors, the IV line, the stillness of her that was so unlike every version of her he had spent 14 months learning. The woman who stood outside in January cold by choice. The woman who argued with contractors in imperfect Korean at 7 a.m. The woman who had 51 sketches in his desk drawer and did not know it. Lying completely still in a hospital bed because someone had looked at his life, identified the person at the center of it, and used her history as a door. They had not targeted Janet because she was vulnerable. They had targeted her because she was the thing Jiho could not afford to lose, and they had known it before he had fully admitted it to himself. "Leave me," he said. His investigator stood, collected the tablet, and left without a word or a backward glance. He had been in this work long enough to know the specific quality of a room that needs to be empty. Jiho sat in the chair beside her bed and held her hand and did not speak for a long time. The city moved outside the window. The machines tracked her pulse. He held her hand and breathed and felt the full weight of what he knew and what he was about to do with it and what it was going to cost. Soo-yeon came to the hospital the following morning. She arrived in her work clothes with her hair arranged and her posture carrying 6 years of professional identity in every line of it. But her eyes had been demolished. Whatever composure she was wearing, it was load-bearing and barely holding. She sat across from Jiho in the small consultation room down the hall and did not attempt to negotiate the opening of the conversation. She confirmed the leaks without him needing to ask twice. The schedule, the vehicle assignments, the merger positions, 4 months of transfers through Dae-won as the intermediary between her and the Shin Group acquisition team. "I didn't know about the breaks," she said. "I need you to hear that. They told me it was about the board vote, that there would be a professional crisis and you would lose the vote and step back from the merger negotiations. No physical harm. That was what I was told and what I believed." "You gave them the car," Jiho said. His voice was even, controlled, more frightening for both qualities. "You gave them the schedule. You gave them the vehicle assignment. You arranged the replacement driver. When you handed over those 4 things together, Soo-yeon, what did you believe they were building with them?" The silence that followed was not the silence of someone thinking. It was the silence of someone who had been living inside a specific avoidance for 4 months and had just run out of room to maintain it. "How do you know Shin Dai-wan?" he said, the composure fractured. "Just at the edges, just enough. New York, 5 years ago, before Seoul and before Han Capital, and before the 6 years of building her entire identity on being the most indispensable person in a powerful man's professional life. A relationship with Daiwan that she had ended and that he had refused to accept the ending of with the specific tenacity of a man who categorizes other people as possessions rather than persons. Things she had done during that period that she was not proud of. Things he had documented with the patient, methodical thoroughness of someone who understood that information was currency and that the most valuable information was the kind that could only be spent once against the right target at the right moment. When he reappeared 8 months ago, it was not a confrontation. It was quieter and more terrible than that. It was a reminder, a demonstration. He had produced just enough of what he was holding to make the shape of the rest of it clear, and then he had told her what he needed, and he had waited, and she had calculated the cost of refusing against the cost of cooperating and made the decision that she would have to live with for the rest of her life. "He told me it was just information," she said. "Schedule data, logistics. He said it would affect a vote. He said it was business. He said no one would get hurt." "And you believed him." "I needed to believe him." "There is a difference between those two things," Jiho said, "and you know it." She looked at her hands. She did not answer. "He used you," Jiho said. "Yes. He found the thing you were most afraid of losing, and he made himself the only alternative to losing it. And you let him. For 4 months you let him walk through a door you were holding open." He paused. "And you let him walk through it straight toward Janet." That sentence did something to the room. It changed the quality of the air. Soo-yeon's hands in her lap went very still, and she did not look up, and the silence between those words and whatever came next was the most honest thing she had produced in months. Jiho stood. "This conversation is being recorded. You will cooperate fully with my legal team and subsequently with every official investigation that follows. You will not contact Daewon. You will not leave Seoul." He moved to the door. Stopped. Did not turn around. "And you will not come to this hospital again." He left her sitting in a room with nothing but what she had done, and the full weight of knowing that sorry was a word that did not currently have anywhere to land. What Jiho did next is the part of this story that people are going to debate forever, and the debate is going to say more about the person having it than about Jiho himself. Because what he did was not emotional. It was not reactive. It was the coldest, most methodical dismantling of another organization that Han Capital had ever executed. And he did it from a hospital chair with a pamphlet folded into triangles in his lap, and a woman he loved unconscious in a bed 10 feet away. Within 72 hours, he had initiated a coordinated short position against Shin Group Holdings' publicly traded assets, leveraging Han Capital's liquid reserves with the precision of someone who had been thinking about how to dismantle this specific organization long before he had a personal reason to. The short was timed with military exactness to coincide with the simultaneous release of regulatory audit findings his legal team had been quietly building for months, a documented case against Shin Group's financial reporting practices that was independently devastating, and in combination with the short position, became something that financial journalists would spend weeks trying to find adequate language for. Shin Group's stock dropped 34% across 2 trading sessions. The speed of it was almost biological, like watching something that had already been dying finally stop pretending. Board members began resigning before the second session closed. The acquisition bid against Han Capital, the thing the entire conspiracy had been engineered to facilitate, collapsed in public in a way specifically designed to ensure it could not be quietly reassembled in 6 months under a different name. Shin Dae-won was arrested at Incheon International Airport at Gate 23, 1 carry-on bag, 2 passports, one of them not in his name, attempting to board a flight to Bangkok. The charges were read to him in a corridor while other travelers moved around them with the indifference of people who have their own flights to catch. Wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, vehicular sabotage resulting in grievous bodily harm. His legal team held together for 4 days before 2 of 3 attorneys withdrew from the case, which is the legal profession's version of a building evacuating before demolition. Jiho watched none of the coverage. He was in a hospital chair, folding a pamphlet, watching Janet breathe, believing, for approximately 72 hours, that the worst of it was finished. He was wrong in a way that was about to fundamentally reframe everything he thought he had just accomplished. Because winning a battle is not the same as winning the war, and the person about to correct him had 18 months of government work and the specific patience of someone who has been watching other people make the same mistake he is currently watching Jiho make. Prosecutor Yoon Tae-sik requested a meeting 3 days after Daewon's arrest. He came without ceremony, sat across from Jiho in a private consultation room, and opened a folder and placed 18 months of documented investigative work on the table, with the specific energy of a man who has been patient for a very long time and is communicating that patience is no longer available. Financial Crimes Division, a case against Shin Group Holdings built from the inside out over 18 months using Shin Dae-won as a cooperative witness under a formally negotiated protected status agreement. The architecture of the case was designed to work upward, using Dae-won's position to generate evidence that pointed toward levels of Shin Group's leadership structure that no previous prosecution had ever been positioned to reach. Not the mid-level operators, the actual architects, the people who made the decisions and left no fingerprints and had spent decades constructing organizations specifically designed to ensure that when accountability came looking, it always found someone else standing in the frame. Dae-won had been talking before his arrest, under agreement. For 3 years, this case had been constructed with the patience of people who understood that the only way to reach the top of an organization like Shin Group was from the inside moving upward, and that this took time and could not be rushed without collapsing the entire structure. Jiho's financial strike had destroyed the controlled conditions of that cooperation in 72 hours. The public collapse of Shin Group's stock had triggered emergency legal countermeasures inside the organization that compromised 3 specific evidence chains. Daewon's new attorneys had identified grounds to challenge his protected status based on the material change in circumstances that Jiho's actions had produced. 3 years of government construction, destabilized by a private retaliation that had felt, from the inside, like justice. "You won the battle," Prosecutor Yoon said. His voice had the flatness of professional restraint doing heavy work. "You may have cost us the entire war." Jiho absorbed this without visible reaction. He was very good at receiving devastating information without rearranging his face. His father had taught him that too, which was the second of a very short list of things. "What do you need from me?" he said. Yoon looked at him for a moment with the measuring expression of a man deciding how much to show his hand. Then he opened a second folder and placed it on the table between them. "We need to understand the complete chain through which Shin Group obtained access to Han Capital's internal information, not just the secretary's role, the full chain, every link, including," he paused here with the specific deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed this pause, "anyone at the ownership or governance level of Han Capital who may have facilitated initial access, intentionally or otherwise, directly or through intermediary instruction." Jiho looked at the second folder. He did not open it. Something happened in his expression that was small and controlled and almost nothing, and Prosecutor Yoon, whose entire professional life had been built on reading exactly that category of almost nothing, saw it clearly and said nothing about it. "I'll need time to review what you have," Jiho said. "Of course," Yoon said. "We have some time. Not unlimited time. And the window for voluntary cooperation to be characterized as voluntary is shorter than the overall window. Those are 2 different clocks and they are both running." Jiho took the second folder. He did not open it in the consultation room. He carried it back to Janet's room and set it on the bedside table and sat down and looked at it sitting there, and did not open it for the rest of that day or the day that followed. Now, right now, this is the moment. Because what is in that folder is not about Shin Group. The name at the end of that chain is not a Shin Group name. And if you have been paying attention to every detail in this story from the beginning, there is one person who has not yet been fully accounted for. One person whose role in this has been present in the background of every scene without ever being named directly. Comment right now if you know who it is. Because the people who are right are about to feel sick about being right, and the people who are wrong are about to have the floor taken out from under them completely. 14 days into Janet's recovery, Soo-yeon returned to the hospital. She had bail conditions, stay in Seoul, report to her assigned legal representative twice weekly. Coming to this hospital was not yet a technical legal violation. She moved through the corridor with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years learning which spaces she could move through without drawing attention. Dark coat, hair down for once, the professional armor she had always worn nowhere in evidence. What was left without it was a woman who looked smaller than Janet had ever seen her look. Jiho was already in the corridor outside Janet's room. He stepped into her path without announcement, without urgency, without any of the theatrical energy of a confrontation. He simply stood there and she stopped, and they looked at each other under the fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway, and the silence between them had a specific texture that was entirely different from every silence they had shared in 6 years of professional proximity. "I know why you're here," he said. "Then you know I don't have a choice," she said. Her voice had nothing professional left in it. What was underneath all the architecture she had spent years constructing was exhaustion. Pure, structural exhaustion. The kind that lives in a person who has been holding something terrible in place through sheer will for too long. "What's in your pocket is not what he told you it is," Jiho said. "Whatever he told you it would do, he lied. He has been lying to you since New York. That is the only truly consistent thing about him. The method changes. The lie is always the same." She did not move. "It's a sedative," he said. "It is not lethal. It is enough to keep her unconscious for several hours while you go through her personal belongings. He needs something she is carrying, something that creates a direct evidentiary connection between him and the original conspiracy in a way that his current legal position cannot survive. You are not here to hurt her. You are here because he contacted you from inside a detention facility and told you that something Janet is holding destroys you both if it surfaces, and he gave you something he said would buy you enough time to find it and remove it. And you came because he has spent 5 years teaching you that when he tells you there is no other option, you believe him." The silence in the corridor was very long. Soo-yeon's hand came out of her coat pocket slowly. The syringe sat in her open palm under the fluorescent light, and she looked at it the way you look at something when the room you have been standing in suddenly becomes visible, and you realize the walls are much closer than you believed. "If what she's carrying surfaces," Soo-yeon said quietly, "it will not destroy you more than you have already been destroyed," Jiho said. "What you have already done has its own full weight. This does not change that weight in any direction. He told you it did because he needed you mobile and he needed you here, and he needed you to bring that, and he managed you from inside a cell because managing you is the only power he has left, and he will use it until someone takes it from him." A long pause. "He said it was the only way," she said. The words came out diminished, rote, like something recited so many times it had lost all meaning. "I know he did," Jiho said. "It is always the only way, until it isn't, and then he finds another only way." Soo-yeon looked at the syringe in her palm for another moment. Then she closed her hand around it and her arm fell to her side. "I was going to be better than this," she said. "Not to him. Not really to anyone present." "I know," he said. He called security from his phone without raising his voice or moving from where he was standing. He kept his eyes on her until she had been escorted out of the building and the corridor was quiet again. Then He stood alone in the fluorescent silence for a moment, and breathed, and went back into Janet's room and sat down in his chair, and picked up the pamphlet he had been folding for 2 weeks, and looked at Janet's face until the thing in his chest that had gone tight slowly released. It was his birthday. He had told absolutely no one. He was reading a project update from Janet's team, photographs of the Green Corridor's completed first phase, sent by her project manager with a note saying everyone was thinking of her when her fingers moved. He had been cataloging every reflex and involuntary movement the doctors had told him to expect and not overinterpret for 14 days. He knew the difference by now. He had learned the vocabulary of her unconscious body the way he had spent 14 months learning every other vocabulary she carried. This was different. This was deliberate. A slow, intentional curl of her fingers toward his hand, like reaching for something specific in the dark and finding it. He put the project update down immediately and did not move for one moment that felt much longer than it was. Her eyes opened. She looked at the ceiling first, the long, careful look of a person taking inventory of a world they have been absent from. Processing the light, the ceiling tiles, the sound of the machines, the smell of the room. Then she turned her head and found him. "Happy birthday," she said, almost no voice behind the words. Just the shape of them, just the breath that carried them. He laughed. It came out broken and short and completely unguarded in a way that his face almost never permitted in the presence of another person, and he reached out and took her hand in both of his and held it. "You remembered," he said. "You made me promise to stay." She swallowed. Her voice was a thread, but it was hers, unmistakably. Entirely hers. "I stayed." The doctors confirmed what the monitoring had been indicating cautiously for 48 hours. Brain activity, normal across all assessed functions. Motor response, returning on schedule. Cognitive orientation, intact. 4 months of physical therapy ahead. A long road, but the direction of it was clear and the destination was no longer in question. The attending physician asked Jiho to step outside for a few minutes. He went. He stood in the corridor and listened to what the doctor told him, and when the doctor finished, he stood there alone for 60 seconds before he moved. He went back in. He sat down in the chair. He did not speak immediately, and Janet watched him with the particular attention of someone relearning a landscape they thought they knew completely, reading him the way she had spent 14 months learning to read him. "Janet, tell me," she said. "There is something they found during the trauma assessment. Something they have been monitoring carefully since the night you came in." He paused. "Something they needed to confirm before they told me. Before they told us." She held his gaze and did not look away. "You were 6 weeks pregnant when the car went off the road." The room held its breath. "And?" she said. One word. Every possible meaning compressed into a single syllable. The entire architecture of what she was prepared to hear and what she was not prepared to hear contained in that one small word. He pressed her hand once, firmly, deliberately. The heartbeat is still there. She closed her eyes, opened them, closed them again. She had been ready. Standing in that bathroom 6 weeks ago with the test in both hands, she had rehearsed this conversation 100 different ways across 4 days. She had planned the setting, chosen the moment, decided on the drive home because she was always better at things that required courage when she was in motion, and had somewhere to look that was not directly at the person she was saying the hard thing to. She had carried it through an entire workday. She had carried it through dinner. She had sat across from him while he asked her to promise to stay, and she had been right there, right on the edge, the words formed and ready, and then there was a mountain road and rain, and a brake pedal with nothing behind it, and the words had stayed inside her for 6 weeks, in a place she could not reach from wherever she had been. "I knew," she said. Her voice was still thin, but it was steady. "That morning, I found out that morning." He was very still. I was going to tell you on the drive home. I had it all planned. I was going to say it while we were moving because I needed somewhere to look that wasn't your face. She paused. I didn't want to see your face when I said it until after you had a moment to feel whatever you were going to feel. I wanted to give you that. He lifted her hand and pressed it against the side of his face and held it there. She felt his skin against her palm, and the warmth of him, and the specific quality of a person trying to contain something that is larger than the space currently available for containing it. I know, he said finally, low, against her hand. It doesn't matter. You're here. You're both here. I promised, she said. You did, he said. They stayed like that for a long time, the machines keeping their careful count, the city outside the window doing what it always did. The light in the room going from afternoon to early evening without either of them marking it. What Janet did not know, lying in that bed holding Jiho's hand against her face, was that the folder was on the bedside table 18 inches from where she lay, that it had been sitting there for 3 days while he sat beside her and folded paper and took calls and met with Prosecutor Yoon and came back each time and did not open it. She did not know what was in it. She did not know that what was in it was going to require Jiho to make a decision that no amount of corporate experience or personal discipline or inherited capacity for the long game had prepared him for. 3 days after Janet woke up, Jiho sat alone in his office. The same desk, the same city through the same window. The drawer with 51 of her sketches filed in chronological order. The room exactly as he had left it, and entirely changed by everything that had happened inside the weeks he had been away from it. He opened the folder. Financial transfer records, internal communication logs, 11 months of documented authorization traced backward with the methodical patience of a government investigation that had been running quietly while everyone involved believed they were invisible. The chain moved through Shin Group's acquisition strategy team and back through shell accounts and intermediary contacts with the specific progression of something constructed to resist exactly this kind of examination, layer after layer of deniability until it arrived at a name. Not a Shin Group name, a Han Capital name, his father's personal legal counsel, a man who had operated as Chairman Park Sung-il's private legal instrument for 20 years, acting under standing instruction, delivered verbally through the channel that had been used for discretionary matters that could not be committed to documentation that might surface through official channels. The instruction, reconstructed through the Council's own communication records and cross-referenced with 3 corroborating financial trails, was specific where it needed to be, and vague where it needed to be. Allow Shin Group limited access to scheduling and vehicle assignment data during a defined operational window. Facilitate the conditions for a boardroom crisis of sufficient severity to pressure Jiho into accepting the merger terms he had been refusing. Create the circumstance. Let the circumstance produce the outcome. The brake tampering was not in the instruction. The documents were explicit on this point. Prosecutor Yoon's team had spent significant effort establishing this clearly. Chairman Park Sung-il had not ordered his son killed. He had ordered the precise conditions that someone else had converted into an attempt to kill his son. Jiho read through the documents 3 times. He was looking, with genuine and disciplined effort, for the version of this that meant something different. The version where his father had looked at his son's life, at the work he was building and the person he was building it beside, and had made a calculation that did not reduce to the cold, architectural decision to engineer a crisis in his own child's life as a strategic instrument. He was looking for the misread, the misattribution, the innocent explanation that the documents were somehow failing to surface. He did not find it. The phone sat on the desk beside the folder. He could call Prosecutor Yoon. Formal cooperation, full, everything he had, everything the documents showed, the complete chain handed over with his own hands regardless of whose name was at the end of it. Let it go, where the evidence led. Let accountability find the person it had been looking for, regardless of what that person's name was or what his relationship to that name had been for the entirety of his life. He could call his father, say the name of what he had found, speak it into that specific silence that had lived between them for years, and watch what it did to the architecture of everything that silence had been built on top of. See what the old man's voice did when he understood that the documents were already in Jiho's hands, and that the choice of what happened next was no longer Chairman Park's to make. He could close the folder, put it in the drawer beneath the sketches, let Shin Dae-won, who was sitting in a detention facility with 3 charges and an abandoned legal team and an increasingly clear understanding of exactly how much his own freedom was worth to him, carry the weight of what the folder contained until a decision became not a choice, but an inevitability. His hand rested on the phone. He sat there in his office in the particular silence of a man who has arrived at a door he cannot go back through and has not yet decided whether he can go forward. He did not pick it up. 2 days later, Janet took her first steps outside. Jiho walked beside her, not holding her arm unless she reached for it, not hovering, not performing the anxiety he was actually carrying, just present, close, matching her pace with the exactness of someone who had spent 14 months learning what her pace was and never once trying to change it. The green corridor in Mapo district had been completed while she was unconscious. Her trees, her bench placement, her drainage calculations made physical and permanent in a city that would walk through this space for decades without knowing her name or what it cost her to be the person who designed it. Her project team had sent photographs, and she had studied them on her phone with the focused silence of a person, assessing their own work against the version that had lived in their head for 2 years. Jiho drove them there without explaining where they were going. She recognized the district when they turned and she looked at him, and he kept his eyes on the road, and she understood without words that this was a gift he had been holding for the right moment. The way he held things, quietly and without announcement, until the moment was exactly right. She walked slowly. The body had its own timeline and could not be argued into a faster one. Jiho stayed at her left shoulder the entire length of the corridor, close enough to feel, far enough to give her the space that the space itself was designed to give people who needed it. She stopped in the center of it, looked up through the canopy she had specified, the light coming through the leaf geometry she had chosen for exactly this quality of afternoon light, the specific filtered warmth that she had argued for in 3 separate meetings with contractors who thought she was being impractical and had eventually deferred to her because she was right, and the light proved it. Felt the bench placement pull her attention the way your own work always does, the gap and the correspondence between the version you imagined and the version that exists. "I built this for strangers," she said. "I know," he said. "I think I needed it too." He said nothing. He took her hand. They stood there while the light moved through the leaves she had chosen, and the city moved around them in its own ongoing rhythm, indifferent and alive, and people passed through the corridor on their way between places without knowing what it cost to build this, or who had almost not survived to see it standing. The folder was on Jiho's desk. Prosecutor Yoon had called that morning. Professional wording. A message that was technically a status check and functionally a deadline. The window for voluntary cooperation to be classified as voluntary had a shape, and that shape was not indefinite. Chairman Park Sung-il had not called his son in 11 days. Not once. Not to ask if he was all right. Not to ask about Janet. Not to ask about anything at all. The silence of a man who either did not know what his son had found or knew exactly what his son had found and was waiting to discover which direction it moved. Somewhere in a detention facility, Shin Dae-won was meeting daily with a new legal team that was doing the math that legal teams do when the charges are serious and the evidence is comprehensive, and the question becomes not whether, but how much, and whether cooperation changes the number in a meaningful direction. Men like Daewon always eventually discover that loyalty is worth precisely as much as their own freedom, and not one more. Jiho stood in a green corridor, holding Janet's hand with everything that came next, waiting just outside the frame of this moment. The folder on the desk, the phone beside it, a father who had not called, a prosecutor who was counting down, a man in a cell who was running his own calculation, and a choice that had been sitting on Jiho's desk for 6 days, getting heavier with every hour he did not make it. Because some decisions cannot be deferred indefinitely without the deferral becoming its own kind of answer. He stood in the corridor and held her hand and let the moment be what it was. The light moved through the leaves. The city breathed. He was not ready yet. But the folder was on the desk, and the phone was beside it. And ready or not, part 2 was already coming. If you stayed until the end of this story, then you already know that Jiho is standing at the most important decision of his life, and it has nothing to do with a merger or a stock position or a boardroom. It has everything to do with what a man does when the person who was supposed to protect him is the person who opened the door to everything that almost destroyed him. Subscribe right now because part 2 is where Jiho makes the call and whoever is on the other end of it loses everything. Like this video if you need that episode immediately, and drop in the comments the question that is going to drive this comment section for days. Does a son owe his father protection that his father did not extend to him? Because some of you are going to say yes, and some of you are going to say absolutely not, and both of those answers are going to reveal something true about the person giving them. This has been the space between us. Part 1 is finished. Part 2 will not be kind.